I wonder if you could talk a little bit about autistic burnout and depression and just sort of where there's maybe an intersection.
Yes, I think that's such an important question. This was one of the first Venn diagrams I ever made was autistic burnout or depression, because once I learned about burnout, I was like, oh, well, I've had many episodes of depression. And I could go back and say all of those were following an autistic burnout and following a really intense time in my life. So again, it's not going to be an either or, but it can be an and. It could be autistic burnout and depression. And it's important to know it when it's both, because when it's both, they both need support, but the support can be slightly different. So first, let's talk about like how to know if it's just burnout or if you're also depressed. So some of the things that would signal that maybe this is also depression would be things like, think about your relationship to pleasure. So there's a word, anhedonia, basically it means loss of pleasure. So when you're depressed, one of the things that happens is it's kind of like the world goes from being a color movie to a grayscale movie. And it's so difficult to access pleasure. So things that used to bring you joy or delight no longer do. So when you have the energy to access your special interest, does that still give you pleasure? Does it not? For me, when I've been in burnout, sometimes I have a hard time energetically accessing it. But if I'm not also depressed, it will still give me joy and delight. When I've been depressed, no, nothing. Nothing brings me joy or delight. Similarly, kind of how we relate to self and I guess existence, in the sense that when we're depressed, everything is terrible. When we look at our past self, well, okay, let me backtrack a little bit. So it can be common for autistic people to have a lot of negative views about self because of ableism, because of negative past experiences. When I'm not depressed, I'm able to see those for what those are. I'm like, okay, that's a painful thought. Wow, okay. But I can unhook from it a little bit, or I can remember times in my life where I didn't feel that way. When I'm depressed and I think back to times I felt good about myself, I'm like, that was a lie. That I was delusional. This is what's real. And so there's this confidence that depressed mind has of your life has always been miserable. You will always be miserable. The future will always be miserable. And that sense of worthlessness will be so hard to unhook from. And so that when I think about my distinctions, that's definitely a huge one, is I can't access hope about myself or existence. And then also, this is a tricky one, but so thoughts about suicide, thoughts about not living, this can be a common in depression. It's not always there, but it can be common. But there's also some suggestion that it can also be part of burnout. Now, there hasn't been research on this. This is a theory, a hypothesis. My hypothesis is with depression, it will be more of the classic, what we call suicidal ideation around, I don't want to be here, or fantasizing about unliving oneself. With burnout, it might be more of what's clinically called non-suicidal morbid ideation. I just, if I go to sleep and I don't wake up tomorrow, there'd be relief in that. There's this, I want things to stop. I'm so exhausted. I want the demands to stop. My theory is that sort of thinking is more common in burnout, and that the more direct suicidal ideation, that's definitely an indication you should talk to someone, and probably an indication that depression is in the mix.
Yeah. Well, and that makes sense, because in that state of burnout, the exhaustion, the overwhelm, the fatigue, it's so intense. You're just looking for any version of rest. And you could make that connection of, well, that's the only way I'm going to get the rest is through that. But that I can see the connection there.
You know, it's interesting. I'm just having this thought now. The first time I learned that phrase, it was in my training, non-suicidal morbid ideation, was actually such a relief to me. Like, oh, there's a name for this. The name of, I just wish I wouldn't wake up. Yeah. And then I think, because we can feel a lot of shame and fear around having those thoughts, for me, when I have those thoughts now, I'm like, what is behind this?
Yeah.
And I get curious about it. Like, is this telling me something about my limits, my exhaustion, my like, what is it that I'm dreading that I'm waking, like that I'm having that thought?
Well, and I feel like having access to that phrase, that wording, it kind of takes, like you were saying earlier, it takes some of the pressure off. It releases something, because those are two very different versions of that. You know, I saw a therapist, two therapists back, where I brought up some ideation and she just kind of looked at me with a blank stare and moved on to a different topic. And I thought, that's odd. And she wanted to focus on anxiety instead of other things. And had she given me that phrasing, that would have completely, first of all, it would have relieved me. It would have brought me down a level, and I would have been able to go, oh, okay, it's this, it's not this. I don't need to panic. So like, we need more of that. We need more people to sort of latch on to that so that they know it is what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. Even as I was starting to etch into that conversation, my anxiety started creeping up of like, okay, this is a heavy topic. Do we talk about it? And also, I think it is an important topic in the sense that this is a risk of autistic people. And also, living with these kinds of thoughts is a common part of the autistic experience. There's this fear out there that if I talk about it, if I talk about these thoughts, it's going to make it more likely to happen. But actually, like, you know, being able to talk about it with your therapist, I wish your therapist had circled back to that conversation. Like, that's really important. And it's, and we can have so much shame around these experiences as well.
Yeah. My current therapist was like, totally normal. Here's how we're going to work through that. Yeah, she made it very cool about the whole thing. So she fixed that. Yeah.
Well, and that can be hard, right? Because we can mention to a therapist, it can increase their anxiety. And then we're like, oh, this is a really scary thing. Yeah.
Well, and it's one of those things, am I allowed to say this? Because if I say this, what's going to
Are they going to put me in a, Yep.
Yeah. We need to normalize this conversation more, because I think it would go a long way to helping people who don't know where to put their thinking on that.
Yeah.
But need to.
Yeah.